This last standard within the fourth era of history, 1450 to 1750, is all about competition between states. And it's, I guess, kind of fitting. This is going to be a good segue into our next era because we're going to talk about economic competition and free markets and capitalism and a new economic standard of the next era. So it's maybe fitting that we're finishing to talk about competition between states in the early modern era. Most of this competition between states is centering on trade routes and the control of those trade routes. First, we've already spoken about how European nations, what gave them a leg up compared to their adversaries around the globe in terms of dominating global trade. And a major aspect of that, the reason that Europeans started to dominate, is because they were all in competition with each other. Spain and Portugal were in a competition with each other, those two countries in competition with England and the Netherlands and France. All of these nations very close in Western Europe to each other in competition over trade routes around the planet, but all seeing what everybody else is doing. So if the British have a new ship or some kind of new cannon technology that they're employing on their ships, the French are going to know about it. The Spaniards are going to know about it. The Dutch are going to know about it. So they're all learning from each other. Just as when Apple develops a new iPhone, Samsung is keeping their eye on whatever new technologies Apple's throwing into it, and vice versa. Whenever Samsung throws out a new phone, Apple's keeping their eye on what's going on. And in the end, the phones of all of these companies end up being much better, right? Well, European navigational technology and European navies in terms of their military capabilities, they all become much better because they're all in competition with each other. But it wasn't just European nations in competition with each other. We've got European nations in competition with outsiders. And the College Board wants us to talk about the trade rivalries between the European states, like the Portuguese initially, and what are known as the Omani states. Oman, O-M-A-N-I. So we're talking about Omani European rivalries. We're going to look at this next map, guys. Today, there is a nation right here called Oman. You guys probably heard of it, right? And there's a body of water right here called the Gulf of Oman. All right? And there's a little port city right here as the Arabian Peninsula practically tickles Persia, right? There's a little port city there called Hormuz, all right? Well, Portuguese are looking, once Vasco da Gama makes his way around Africa and gets into the east coast of Africa and hops across to India, they recognize how important all these trading cities are to the Indian Ocean trade network. And Portugal wants control of Hormuz. Well, the traders in that region, who are primarily Muslim traders from the Arabian Peninsula, the traders in this region don't easily want to give it up. And they will actually do battle with the Portuguese who are coming in with their, what are we going to call their ships?
Gunboats.
The caravels. They're coming in with their caravels with guns ablazing. And in 1509, the Portuguese and Muslim merchant armies, I should say, are going to do battle at a battle known as the Battle of Diu, D-I-U. The Battle of Diu, a naval battle in 1509 between the Portuguese and a collection of Muslim armies from the region. And shockingly, we know who's going to win, right? Who ultimately takes control of much of the Indian Ocean trade. The Portuguese win, all right? And it gives them early control of the trade routes in the eastern part of the Indian Ocean. Good? Yes, ma'am. Battle of Diu, D-I-U. Now remember, there is no love lost between Portuguese Catholics and Muslims. Remember, the Portuguese and the Spaniards, they're the ones who drove back the Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula and ultimately drove them out of Iberia. And it was those Portuguese and Spaniards who felt like they were on the front lines of defending Catholicism and spreading Catholicism around the globe. And the Muslims of the Middle East became some of their prime enemies. All right? We already talked, I believe, about how particularly brutal Vasco da Gama himself was to Muslim merchants who wouldn't follow the new dictates of the Portuguese traders. Good? Good. Johnny Depp becomes important here when we talk about piracy in the early modern era, particularly in the Caribbean. From roughly the 1500s, the early 1500s, reaching its peak in the 1700s, and then starting to wane by the 1800s as state navies got more powerful. Piracy was a major issue in the Caribbean. Now, my son likes to ask me, Dad, because when we watch Pirates of the Caribbean, he really likes that, and he says, Dad, are there still pirates? And I say, absolutely, but they just don't look like Johnny Depp or Jack Sparrow or whatever. A pirate is anybody it's a robber on the open seas. It's a thief on the open seas. That's all a pirate is. What becomes more important to our story, and so we can recognize that there are these rogue criminals on the open seas who see these ships carrying great treasures, great riches, traveling back and forth across the Atlantic or throughout the Caribbean, and they want to seize those ships and steal their booty, right? Kids always like that word. It's a funny word, right? They want to steal their loot. So that's important, and we recognize that that's there, but that is always there. What I think is more important for us to recognize, especially in terms of the competition between European states, is sometimes during this era, states would actually employ pirates to do some of their dirty work. States would pay pirates to disrupt the trade of their trading rivals. For example, France. Yes, ma'am. Kind of like a mercenary, but when we're talking about pirates, we're going to call those guys privateers. So if you are a good old-fashioned pirate, but the French government comes knocking on your ship, knocking on your door, whatever they would knock on, if the French government comes knocking on your door saying, hey, rather than you just making all your money from stealing the loot from other ships, we will actually pay you to start messing with Spanish ships and to steal their loot. And so you can keep their loot, and we'll give you money, and it's a win-win for you, and it's a win for us. This is good, right? And so states began to use these pirates to negatively impact the trade of their rivals, all right? This happened in both the Atlantic Ocean and in the Indian Ocean, but the fact that it was happened and used by states is another example of methods that states would try to use to impact trade and control of trade routes. Okay? Good. We also have some outright state rivalries, and we've already spoken of this, the rivalry between the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire. The Ottomans saw themselves as the true Muslim caliphate. The Ottomans, remember, were Sunni Muslims. The Safavid Empire, that was a Shia Muslim state. So these guys thought these guys practiced wrong, and vice versa. Ottomans were Sunni, Safavids were Shia. And guys, hopefully you'll remember, the Safavid Empire today, most of the geography of the Safavid Empire occupies today's nations of Iran and Iraq. And the majority of the Muslims in Iran, almost 100% of the Muslims in Iran are Shiite Muslims. The majority of Muslims in Iraq, about 60% of them, are Shiite Muslims. So we'll hopefully remember that was a Sunni population. Whereas the Ottoman territory, they're Sunni. And most of these parts of the world today, they're predominantly Sunni Muslim. Yes?
How come Ottoman spread all over Vienna? I thought Vienna was the last stop where Ottomans had...
Yeah, good call. I don't like this map.
Yeah, it's too much.
Bad map.
Yeah.
Excellent. Tyler's always pointing out our bad maps. This is just me rushing on Wikipedia or on Google to find a map. And I was looking more at this line rather than that line. So the Ottomans never conquered Vienna. They got to the gates of Vienna, the doorstep of Vienna, but they never conquered it. Good point there, Tyler. You win for the day. So this was a natural conflict between the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire. It's going to do a couple things, all right? First of all, there's a major battle that will take place between them called the Battle of Calderan, Chaldiran. The Battle of Calderan. Chaldiran. The Battle of Calderan. It was a decisive Ottoman victory, which gave the Ottoman eventual control. They would drive the Safavid back, gave them control of eastern Anatolia and what is today northern Iraq. And not shockingly, in northern Iraq is primarily where the Sunni Muslims live. Southern Iraq is where the Shiite Muslims live today. But what else this rivalry is going to do, because this is happening at the exact same time that European powers are starting to venture and take more control of the rest of the world. This is like the double whammy for the Ottoman Empire. And in our next era, we're going to talk a lot about the weakness of the Ottoman Empire. In fact, we're going to start calling them the sick man of Europe. The Ottoman Empire, not only are they having a serious military rivalry with the Safavid, but they're now losing huge amounts of former resources, trade resources, that they would have brought in, as the Mediterranean Sea has declined in a trading source for the Ottoman Empire. Because now Europeans are going around Africa, or they're going west to get to the east. So the Ottoman Empire, even though they win this battle, and they ultimately win the war, they last longer than the Safavids. The Safavid conflict is going to weaken them along the same time that the Europeans avoiding the Middle East for trade is going to weaken the Ottoman Empire, leaving the Ottoman Empire ripe for the picking in our next era. That's a little bit of foreshadowing that's going to come. The last thing to mention, yes sir, Tyler.
I was just going to ask, when you said the northern part of Iraq is Sunni, is that right? Like in the Sunni triangle, is that why Saddam Hussein was born in that part? So that's why he's also Sunni?
He's Sunni, absolutely. Yeah.
So the main reason that they decline is because Mediterranean sea routes are dying off because they're taking around Africa.
Very good, because all of these European traders who used to get their riches from the east by going through and ultimately paying Muslim middlemen to trade through their cities, now they're all being avoided, or for the most part they're being avoided, as the Portuguese go around Africa and as the Spaniards go west to get to the east.
Did they not precedent that then?
Did they not what?
Precedent it, like they didn't think it would happen?
I don't know that they thought it would happen. I think it was something they couldn't avoid. Like, could they have lowered their prices or something and made it cheaper for Europeans to continue trading that way? Possibly, but we already mentioned, even if it was cheaper, would the Spanish and the Portuguese wanted to still do business with the Muslims? They really didn't like them. All right, the last thing to mention for this standard, and then we're done with Era 4, is that there would still be tremendous local resistance within states. Issues that states would still have with local populations and protest movements and peasant uprisings. This is going to be a continuity. Hey, guess what? It's pretty much a continuity throughout human history. There are always stories of peasants being upset. In Japan particularly, when Tokugawa Ieyasu takes control of Japan as he begins to centralize the state, all of those old landlords who used to have control of their own little entities. Remember what we call those Japanese landlords? Daimyo. All of those local lords in Japan who used to provide their own military service, and who is doing the military work for those landlords? Now the shogun was like the samurai. The samurai. These were the knights of feudal Japan. Well, when Japan was disunited, when Japan was decentralized, you've got a lot of power in the lords, and you've got a lot of power in the samurai. Tokugawa Ieyasu starts to squeeze that away, starts to centralize the state, and now we see a weakening landlord class, and also less point for the samurai. And so you're going to see samurai protests, like losing their old stature that they once had. You're also going to see at the same time peasant protests within Japan, within China. This is not uncommon to any other era.